let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are unpacking something incredibly heavy but absolutely crucial. We're looking at a profoundly moving source document by Eric Willis. It's a personal memoir called Turn on the Light, and it chronicles his agonizing real-life journey of discovering and ultimately surviving a lifetime of hidden narcissistic abuse. This isn't just a sad story about a tough childhood. It's actually a super detailed analytical breakdown of how systematic emotional manipulation works from the inside out, and how you can eventually find the strength to break free from it. So ask yourself this: what actually happens when you realize the person you respect the most is, in reality, your greatest abuser? It's a gut-wrenching thought, right? Eric's documentation sets out to completely validate the difficult journey of coming to terms with this exact reality. When the abuser is a parent, society basically conditions us to look for the good in them, to write off their harshness as just tough love. But as we'll see through Eric's experience, sometimes that respect is entirely weaponized to hide a really dark truth. The whole foundation of this explainer is built on this one powerful realization. Eric writes, "I woke up one morning and realized that I had been living my life in a peculiar kind of darkness." Think about that for a second. Eric was a successful adult, a minister, a musician, a father, and yet he was carrying this invisible, exhausting weight of being the adult child of a sociopathic narcissist. This was the turning point. The moment he decided he could no longer live in that darkness, he had to, literally, turn on the light and expose the reality of his father's behavior. To really grasp how deep this darkness went, we have to look at a highly specific, chaotic 72-hour window. His mother, who had been battling Alzheimer's for a decade, was suddenly given just 72 hours to live. On Thursday, Eric gets the grim call from his dad. By 5 a.m. on Saturday, he's driving hours just to get to his dying mother's bedside. But then, Saturday evening rolls around, and the sequence of events takes this bizarre, cruel twist. It completely reveals how rapidly his father's priorities shifted away from his own dying wife. And this setup paints a staggering picture of the dynamic in Eric's home. On one hand, you've got his mother, a compassionate, selfless teacher who spent 30 years nurturing others, writing her husband's sermons, literally offering everything she had to her family. And on the flip side, you have the father, demanding, callous, and just deeply, deeply self-absorbed. It was a household with a mother who gave absolutely everything, paired with a father who just consumed it all. Which leads us to what we can only call the banquet betrayal. It happens in 3 jaw-dropping steps. Picture this. Eric is sitting there with his mother, offering the only thing he has left, which is his presence. His dad periodically pops in, and Eric realizes he's checking his dying wife's temperature by touching her feet. But it's not out of care. He's trying to gauge if she'll survive long enough for him to attend a church banquet that night. Step 2. The father literally abandons his dying wife to go play the trumpet at this banquet. And step 3, the ultimate betrayal. He manipulates his grieving son into accompanying him to play the piano, basically tricking Eric into hiding his father's utter disgrace from the public.
And it's on that frantic car ride, literally speeding down the highway at 90 miles an hour trying to keep up, that Eric has this massive cinematic epiphany. He's watching his father's car pull away and disappear over a hill, and it hits him like a ton of bricks. He never cared about my mother. He never cared about me. Looking through his windshield in that exact moment, Eric finally saw his father's complete and utter lack of regard for anyone but himself.
Now, to make sense of this, we have to define exactly what Eric was dealing with: a sociopathic narcissist. We're talking about someone who fundamentally lacks empathy, who exploits others purely for their own self-glorification. They don't view loved ones as human beings. They view them as objects to be used, or incredibly, as competition to be destroyed. For this kind of abuser, absolutely everything in their world must revolve entirely around them. Let's dig into how this actually takes shape. Anatomy of a narcissist. Decades of hidden trauma. You might be wondering, how does someone even comply with a demand to leave their dying mother's side? Well, to understand that bizarre compliance, we have to look at the tactics used over decades. The source material flashes back to Eric's childhood, unpacking the systematic methods his dad used to break his spirit. We see total dehumanization and extreme suppression. Eric wasn't even allowed to have normal human emotional reactions. But the most horrifying tactic? Masking pure brutality as discipline. The text details how the father would literally beat Eric with commercial mop sticks, trying to break his spirit like a slave master. Actually, his father openly studied literature on the making of a slave just to enforce absolute subservience in his own house. The psychological toll here is just immense.
Eric describes it as being too stressed to be blessed. His father essentially engineered the household stress level to sit permanently at 110%. He'd demand unreasonable speed for the simplest tasks, constantly yelling and intimidating to induce this paralyzing anxiety. And this stress physically affected Eric. It messed with his ability to read, to play music without tension, and ultimately turned him into a finisher who couldn't finish, completely sabotaged by this anxiety-driven impatience.
But why? Why on earth would a father actively sabotage his own remarkably gifted son? Eric was a talented musician. Most parents would be over the moon with pride. But a narcissist, they don't experience pride in others. The text explains the shocking reality that the father viewed his own child's musical gifts as a direct threat to his own grandiosity. He always needed to be the smartest, most talented person in the room, and he got there by systematically suppressing his son's potential. And unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. The abuse continues, the lie outlives loss. You see, in a narcissistic family, the abuse doesn't just stop when someone passes away, it just mutates. After his mother's death, the father's manipulation pivoted straight into financial exploitation. Eric calls it the estate swindle. It was highly calculated. Step 1. Within 6 months, the dad remarries a wealthy woman with an ironclad prenuptial agreement. Step 2. He attempts to secretly refinance the estate he shared with Eric's mother so he can pull cash out for himself. Step 3. When the bank says, hey, we need the children's signatures, he actively hides their inheritance rights, using division and outright lies to swindle his own kids. 50%. Just to put that number into perspective, under Louisiana law, the kids were legally entitled to half of their deceased mother's estate. And we're talking about half of a $1.1 million portfolio here. The father's intention was to take 100% of it and leave his grieving children with absolutely nothing. He acted like the money, much like his family, existed solely for his own consumption. But here is where everything shifts. Eric transitions from victim to survivor. He adopts this incredibly powerful mindset. Pain without a purpose is unadulterated pain. By stepping up as a state administrator to fight back legally and halt his father's tyrannical financial abuse, Eric begins to find real purpose in his decades of trauma. He decides right then and there to stop being the compliant child and start forcing the truth to the surface. So how do we fix it? Moving to our final section, the cure, breaking the generational curse. Eric doesn't just share his story, he provides a literal roadmap for anyone stuck in this kind of toxic family dynamic. And it starts with a hard truth. Respect is more powerful than love. Eric explains that as a kid, he didn't actually like his father. He respected him out of intense fear and societal conditioning, kind of like how a soldier respects a drill sergeant. Abusers rely heavily on this. They weaponize your respect and obedience to control you, even when there is absolutely no love present whatsoever. Realizing that is step 1 to breaking free. Then there's the concept of forgiveness, and Eric uses this brilliant fishing metaphor to explain it. Fake forgiveness is basically leaving the hook in the fish's mouth but giving it some line to swim around. You're still attached, meaning the abuser can still reel you back in whenever they want. True forgiveness? That means taking the hook entirely out of their mouth. You release the abuser from your own anger, but you firmly and permanently cut off their access to your life. So the most crucial point in all of this? Swim away. Eric literally looked at his father and told him to swim up out of his life. The text deeply validates the absolute necessity of walking away from abusive family members. You do not owe an abuser your mental health, your presence, or your future. To protect your peace, sometimes the only viable option you have is to swim away and never, ever look back. Now, taking that step is, of course, incredibly difficult. Eric totally gets why people stay stuck. As he puts it, we cannot embrace what we cannot believe. It is profoundly painful to accept that a parent is truly unscrupulous. Because that reality hurts so much, victims will rationalize the abuse, rename it, and make excuses for it. But to break the cycle, you have to embrace the ugly truth. So, drawing from Eric's journey, here's your actionable roadmap to recovery. First, turn on the light by speaking the truth out loud. Second, educate yourself on their manipulation tactics so you stop falling for them. Third, establish ironclad boundaries. Fourth, forgive for your own peace, but absolutely do not enable further abuse. And finally, consciously choose to eradicate the cycle so it doesn't pass on to the next generation. Which leaves us with one final powerful question to think about. What curse or toxic behavior do you need to face, chase, and completely eradicate in your own family tree? The trauma might not be your fault, that the healing is your responsibility. We really hope Eric's courage to turn on the light helps illuminate the path forward for anyone out there trying to find their way out of the darkness.